My name is Renata Kessler. I am 36 years old, and I have spent 14 years learning exactly what other people's mouths look like when they are hiding pain. I am a dental hygienist. I have scaled the teeth of judges and line cooks and one very famous local weatherman, and I can tell you that fear looks the same on every face when it opens for you. I had never once seen it on my own face until a Tuesday in March, sitting across a laminate desk from a loan officer named Preston A., watching him decide how to tell me something he clearly did not want to be the one to say. I was there for a mortgage pre-approval. My landlord had sold the duplex I had rented for 6 years, and I had 90 days to find somewhere to live, and I had decided, at 36, after 14 years of steady paychecks and a savings account I had built $100 at a time, that I was finally going to buy instead of scramble. Everyone told me it was a formality. My realtor, a woman named Joy who has sold half the houses in my zip code, said, "Honey, with your income and your credit, this is a Tuesday afternoon errand." I believed her, because I had never once in my life missed a payment on anything. Preston A. turned his monitor around so I could see it. He did not say anything at first. He just turned the screen, and I looked at a credit report with my name at the top, and underneath my name there was a list, and the list did not stop 11 trade lines. 2 credit cards from a store I have never shopped at, a car loan for a Honda Accord I have never owned. A department store card opened in the year I was 11 years old. I said, "This is not mine." Preston A. looked at me for a long moment, and then he did something that I think about often. He turned the monitor back around, so I could not see it anymore, and he said quietly, "I did not think it was. Welcome back to Evelyn's quiet table, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you have ever been told you were bad with money by the person who is actually spending it, pull up a chair. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from, and be sure to subscribe. I want to take you back 19 years, because that is how old the first line on that report was, and I did not understand any of it yet. Dek Wibbelgeld dal die too. What I was told I was, da del die. Grew up being called the bad one with money, not cruelly. That word matters in this story, because for a long time I mistook the absence of cruelty for the absence of harm. My mother, Deb Kessler, never once raised her voice about it. She said it the way you would state a fact about the weather. Renata has never been good with numbers. Renata spends without thinking. Renata will need help managing things when she is older. Mark leaved her. That is the part I find hardest to say out loud, even now, even with the paperwork sitting in a folder on my kitchen table. I believed her for 19 years, because there was never a single moment where the belief was tested. It just accumulated, the way sediment does, one small comment at a time, until it was the bedrock I built my whole understanding of myself on top of. Here is what that belief cost me directly, in decisions I made because I thought I was the person my mother said I was. I did not apply to the state university, because my guidance counselor said my grades supported it, and my mother said, gently, "Are you sure that is wise with how you handle stress about money?" I went to community college instead, and I have a good life because of it, but I made that choice believing something false about myself. I did not open a credit card until I was 26, 4 years after everyone I knew, because my mother had spent my adolescence telling me I could not be trusted with one. When I finally did, I called her before I signed the application, and she sighed audibly on the phone and said, "Well, I hope you know what you are doing." There is a specific memory from when I was 17 that I did not understand until this year, and I want to give it to you now because it will matter later. I had a part-time job at a smoothie shop, minimum wage, maybe $90 a week after taxes. My mother offered to hold on to it for me, in an envelope in her dresser, so I would not, in her words, blow it on nothing. I agreed because I was 17 and it seemed like a reasonable, even a caring, thing for a mother to offer. I never once asked to see the envelope, not once in a year and a half of handing over my paychecks. When I finally did ask, at 18, preparing to move out for community college, my mother told me she had already spent it on things I needed, which she itemized as a winter coat, a dentist copay, and a portion of the family's electric bill that month. I remember feeling ashamed asking for the money back at all. I remember apologizing to her, at 18, for having wanted my own paycheck. I did not understand until decades later that the shame I felt in that exact moment was not a natural response to a fair situation. It was a trained response, built over years, to punish myself for wanting anything that was mine. I have since done the math on that envelope. $90 a week for roughly 18 months comes to a little over $6,000. I never saw a single dollar of it again, and I never asked again, because I had learned correctly that asking cost more than it was worth. I paid off my sister Marisol's spring break trip to Cancun when I was 22 and she was 19, because my mother told me privately that Marisol was struggling and it would mean a lot. And it did not occur to me until years later to ask why the 19-year-old college student spring break was my responsibility and not, say, our mother's. Every single one of those decisions makes complete sense if the story I had been told about myself was true. Every single one of them looks like something else entirely once you know what I found out on that Tuesday in March. My mother was not worried about my relationship with money. She was managing the file. Dakokal.Dali 3. Age 11. Kelpbull died. The oldest trade line on that report was a department store credit card. Opened when I was 11 years old, in 2001. I called the store's parent company 2 weeks after the meeting with Preston Ad. Once I understood enough to know what questions to ask. I got a woman named Fran in their fraud department, and Fran, who I would come to think of as one of the more decent people I have ever spoken to on a phone, pulled the original application. It had my social security number, it had my correct date of birth, it had a signature that was not mine, in handwriting that Fran, reading off her screen, described as an adult cursive, rounded, consistent with the other applications on this account. It listed my occupation as student, which was the only honest word on the entire form. I was 11. I was in the 6th grade. I was worried about a boy named Danny Ferris and a math test on fractions. My mother was, at that exact time, 3 years into a period my father later confirmed to me had been financially difficult. He had lost his job at a manufacturing plant in 1999 and had been underemployed for almost 4 years. I do not say this to excuse what happened. I say it because I have needed to understand the mechanism, not just feel the wound. And the mechanism is almost always this simple and almost always this old. A parent under real pressure looks at the file cabinet of documents in the house, and one of those documents is a child's social security card, and the child's credit is, at that moment, the only unused credit in the building. Fran told me something else that took my breath away in a way I had not expected. She said the account had been managed responsibly for the first 11 years. Paid on time. Balance kept low. It was not a smash and grab. It was a farm, an account built to look healthy, using a child's identity, for the specific purpose of eventually being useful. And it was useful for a very long time, to somebody who was not me. I asked Fran one more question before I let her go, because I needed to know, and she was kind enough to look it up rather than tell me it was outside her job. I asked her what the account had actually been used for, in those early years, before I was old enough for it to matter to me directly. She read me the transaction history. Appliance purchases. 2 Christmases worth of holiday shopping charged in November and December of consecutive years. A washing machine in 2003. A set of tires in 2004. Ordinary things. That is what got me, sitting in my car in the store's parking lot with the phone against my ear. It was not glamorous. Nobody bought jewelry or took a vacation on my 11-year-old name. It was tires and a washing machine and Christmas presents, the exact unremarkable furniture of an ordinary household under ordinary strain, purchased on the one piece of unused credit in the building, which happened to belong to a child who did not yet know what a credit card was. I think that is actually the detail that broke something loose in me, more than any single larger number could have. It would have almost been easier to be angry at something dramatic. Instead, I was angry at a washing machine, at Christmas presents, at the sheer domestic ordinariness of what had been built on top of me. Duokapel Dondali 4. The other 10 lines dat topel dodly. I am going to walk you through the rest of the file, because I did, line by line, over about 6 weeks, and I think the audience deserves to see the actual shape of it rather than a summary. Because the shape is the whole horror. 2 more department store cards, opened when I was 14 and 16. A gas station card at 17. All of them behaved the same way. Opened, used moderately, paid mostly on time, kept alive. Then, starting when I was 20, the pattern changed, and I understand now why it changed. I moved out at 20 for community college. I was no longer in the house every day for my mother to manage the mail. The payments on all 4 of those older accounts began slipping, 30 days late. 60 days late. By the time I was 23, all four had charged off a car loan, opened when I was 25, for a 2009 Honda Accord. I have never owned a Honda Accord in my life. I called the finance company, and a very tired man named Julio told me the vehicle had been registered to an address in the next county over, an address I recognized instantly, because it belonged to my mother's boyfriend at the time. A man named Kurt, who I met exactly 4 times and never liked, 3 more retail cards, opened between when I was 28 and 33, mostly small limit, mostly maxed within months, mostly defaulted within a year. The total, across 19 years in original credit extended, was just under $61,000. The total currently owed, with 19 years of interest, fees, and collection activity compounding on top of principal that was never mine to begin with, was $104,000. My credit score, the day I sat across from Preston Odd, was 481. I want to tell you what a 481 does to a life, because most people who have never seen one do not understand its texture. It is not a single denial. It is a low hum underneath every single financial decision you make. Every apartment application that asks for a deposit twice the normal size. Every phone plan that requires a deposit before they will activate a line. Every single time in 14 years that I quietly, privately wondered what was wrong with me. I was not bad with money. I had never once in 14 years of adult financial life, the way the host holds the book, missed a payment on anything that was actually mine. I was carrying somebody else's score, and she had been telling me for 19 years that it was my fault. If you have ever quietly believed you were the irresponsible one in your family, and never once seen the actual paperwork behind that belief, subscribe and stay with me. Because pulling the actual paperwork is the entire turn in this story, and it took me exactly one Tuesday afternoon to start doing it. I drove home from Preston Aid's office, and I did the one thing I had genuinely never done in 36 years of hearing about my bad relationship with money. I requested my full credit file from all 3 bureaus, using the free annual report the federal government makes available. Not a summary, not an app score, the full file, every account, every date, every original creditor. It came by mail 4 days later, in an envelope thick enough that I remember weighing it in my hand on the porch before I opened it, the way you weigh a letter you already suspect is bad news. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same one where, months later, I would lay out the folder for my mother, and I read 41 pages of my own financial history for the first time in my life. Dakwickles Dodley 5. The name I recognized, Duquitfacol Dondalii, did not confront my mother right away. I want to be honest about why, because I think it matters more than the confrontation itself. I was ashamed. Even holding the proof in my hand, even understanding, intellectually, that none of it was my doing, some old wiring in me still flinched at the idea of accusing my own mother of something this large. I sat with the file for almost a month before I discussed a person. The person I told was my husband, Ivan. I want to give him credit here, because he did something that changed the entire direction of what happened next. He did not react with rage on my behalf, which is what I expected and, honestly, what I wanted at the time. He read every page twice, in silence, at our kitchen table, and then he said one sentence. He said, "Renata, this is not a family problem. This is a federal crime. And there is a specific process for it, and I think we should stop feeling this and start filing it." I did not know there was a process. I had assumed, the way most people assume, that this was simply a mess I would spend the rest of my life quietly trying to clean up. A private family shame with no exit. Ivan spent 3 nights researching, and what he found is the reason I am telling you any of this, because I think it is the single most useful piece of information in this entire story, and I wish somebody had handed it to me 19 years ago. There is a federal law called the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Within it, there is a section, 605B, that was written specifically for identity theft. It says that if a consumer submits an identity theft report, along with proof of identity, to the credit bureaus, the bureaus are required, by law, to block the fraudulent information from appearing on that consumer's credit report within 4 business days, not investigate over 90 days, not review over 60 days, block. Within 4 business days, I asked Ivan what an identity theft report actually was, thinking it would require a lawyer we could not afford. It requires 2 things. A report filed with the Federal Trade Commission at a website called identitytheft.gov, which takes about 20 minutes and is free, and a police report filed with a local law enforcement agency describing the fraud, That is the whole mechanism. A government website and a police station. I had spent 19 years believing the mess I was standing in required an army of lawyers to escape, and the actual door out had been sitting there, unlocked, this entire time. Nobody had ever told me it existed, because nobody in my family had any incentive to tell me, and I had never once had a reason to look for it, because I did not know I was a victim of anything. I thought I was simply bad with money. I want to say something here that I think matters more than anything else in this story. This is not rare. I looked into it once I understood what had happened to me, and the Federal Trade Commission's own data says that roughly 1 in every 50 American children will have their identity used fraudulently before they turn 18. Over 70% of those children were victimized by someone they knew. There is a woman named Axton Betts Hamilton whose mother did this to her starting at age 11, and her credit score was destroyed so completely by adulthood that she could not qualify for an apartment on her own income, and she eventually wrote a memoir about piecing it together. There is another woman, Kristen Collier, who spent a decade of her adult life clearing $200,000 her own mother had borrowed in her name. I am not special. That is the strange comfort I found in all of this. I am not uniquely unlucky or uniquely naive. This happens quietly in ordinary houses to ordinary children at a scale that stunned me, and almost none of us are ever told the paperwork exists to fix it. If you have ever wondered why your own numbers never quite made sense, stay with me. Subscribe, because what happened at the kitchen table 6 weeks later is the part I actually built this file for. Jikigel degek 6. 6 weeks. Dikik here is what 6 weeks of building a file actually looks like, because I think the drama people imagine, some tense confrontation scene, is nothing like the reality, and the reality is more satisfying in a way I did not expect. Week 1. I filed the report at identitytheft.gov. It asked me questions in plain language. What happened? When you found out, what accounts were affected? It generated, at the end, a document called an FTC Identity Theft Report, with a case number automatically the same day. Week 1, I also went to the police station in the town where I currently live, not where I grew up, because that is what the FTC's instructions told me to do. File where you reside now. A detective named Maricela Ubina took my statement. I will never forget how she asked her questions, not with judgment, with the flat, procedural calm of someone who has taken this exact statement many times before. She asked me, at one point, "Do you know who did this?" I said I suspected my mother. She said, "You do not have to name anyone today if you are not ready. The report can note the perpetrator as unknown for now, and you can amend it later. But I will tell you, in my experience, in cases like yours, it is almost always someone in the household." I did not name my mother that day. I want you to know that, because I think it says something true about how slowly a person's understanding actually turns, even with a folder of proof in her hands. It took me 3 more weeks after that to be ready to write the name. Week 2 through 4, I built the rest of the file. Fran at the department store sent me the original 2001 application by mail, with the forged signature. Julio at the auto finance company sent me the loan documents for the Honda Accord, with Kurt's address on the registration. I pulled full account histories from all 11 trade lines, one certified letter at a time. I want to be honest about what those weeks felt like, because I do not think forensic clarity is the clean, triumphant feeling people expect it to be. It felt like grief with paperwork attached. Every document I received was proof that I had been telling myself the wrong story about my own life since I was 11 years old, and grieving that wrong story took up just as much of those 6 weeks as the actual filing did. Week 5 I called Marisol. My sister is 33. She has 3 kids and a job at a pediatric clinic and, as far as I know, has never had a single fraudulent account opened in her name. I asked her carefully whether our mother had ever mentioned struggling for money around 2001. When I was 11, Marisol went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Renata, I need to tell you something, and I have felt sick about it for years and never known how to bring it up." She told me that when she turned 18, our mother had asked her directly whether she would be willing to let her open just one card in Marisol's name, just for emergencies, just until things got steadier. Marisol had said no. She had said no clearly enough that our mother never asked again. Marisol had never told me, because she assumed, if it had happened to her at all, it had happened to both of us the same way. And she did not want to make things harder between me and our mother by bringing up something she thought was ancient history. It had not happened to both of us the same way. It had happened to me for 19 years, starting at 11, without my ever being asked. I asked Marisol why she thought our mother had asked her directly, at 18, instead of simply opening the account the way she had with me at 11. Marisol thought about it for a while. Then she said, "I think by the time I turned 18, she had already learned something from you." I asked what she meant. "You never questioned anything," Marisol said. "You never asked to see the envelope. You never asked why the coffee cake at every family thing was store-bought and passed off as homemade. You never asked why you were the one covering my Cancun trip when you were the older one working full-time and I was still in school. I think, by the time I was 18, Mom had figured out that some kids you can just do things to, and some kids you have to ask, and I was the kind you had to ask, and you were not." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I have sat with it many times since. It is possible to be, without ever choosing it, the child in a family who gets managed instead of asked. I do not think it is a comment on my intelligence. I think it is a comment on my compliance, built the same way the credit file was built, one small unquestioned thing at a time, starting so young that by the time I was old enough to notice the pattern had already become the entire shape of who I understood myself to be around her. Marisol was allowed to say no at 18 because she had never been taught, from age 11, that saying no was not an option available to her. Week 6 was the police station again. I sat across from Detective Ubina and I wrote the name in the space on the form that says, plainly in block capital letters printed by the state, "Personted this fraud." I wrote Deborah Ann Kessler. My mother's full legal name. My hand was completely steady when I wrote it. I want you to know that, because I expected it to shake, and it did not, and I think that is because by week 6, the grieving part of the process was mostly finished, and what was left was simply a woman filling out a form correctly. Dataquumple.97. The 4 days. I sent the completed identity theft report, along with a copy of my driver's license and the FTC affidavit, to all 3 credit bureaus by certified mail, return receipt requested, on a Thursday in late April. I sent 1 letter each to Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and I want you to understand that I typed those letters myself, at my kitchen table, using a template Ivan had found through a nonprofit called the Identity Theft Resource Center. And I did not pay a single lawyer a single dollar to do it. The law says 4 business days. I did not fully believe it until I watched it happen. Ivan sat with me at the table that Thursday morning, coffee going cold, both of us refreshing 3 different banking apps like teenagers waiting on a college decision, which is a strange thing to admit about 2 adults in their late 30s. But it is exactly what we were. Monday, nothing. Tuesday, an automated email from Equifax confirming receipt of my dispute. Wednesday, TransUnion's portal updated, and 8 of the 11 fraudulent trade lines simply disappeared from my file, replaced with a note that read blocked due to identity theft, per FCRA Section 605B. Thursday morning, I checked my score before I had even had coffee. Equifax had processed overnight. Experian came through by that afternoon. My score, which had been 481 on the Tuesday in March that started all of this, was 703 by the following Thursday. I sat at my kitchen table and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was a child, and it was not sadness or not only sadness. It was something closer to relief so large it did not have anywhere else to go. I called Prestonais the following Monday. He remembered me instantly. I told him what had happened, and there was a long pause on the line, and then he said quietly, "I am very glad you called. I do not get many people who come back to tell me." Detective Ubina called me that same Thursday afternoon, unprompted, to check on how the bureau process had gone. I have thought about that phone call a great deal since, because it was not required of her. Cases like mine, she told me plainly, rarely move forward to prosecution, mostly because families like mine rarely name a suspect at all, and she said she liked to check in on the ones that did, just to know the paperwork had done its job, even when the family did not want a courtroom. I told her my score had jumped over 200 points in 4 days. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "That is the part people never believe until it happens to them. The law is not always slow. Sometimes the slow part is just getting a person to believe they are allowed to use it." I got my mortgage pre-approval 4 weeks later. Not a formality this time. Earned, clean, with a real number attached to it that had always, actually, been mine. I want to tell you about the specific hour between checking my score on that Thursday morning and calling Preston odd, because it is the part of this story that surprised me the most and the part I think about the most often now. I did not immediately feel triumphant. I sat at my kitchen table for almost an hour doing nothing at all, just holding my phone, watching the number 703 on the screen, and what I actually felt was something closer to disorientation. For 36 years, a low number had been the proof my mother offered, silently, whenever she needed it, that I was the child who could not be trusted with things. The number had done work for her for a very long time. It had explained why I needed help, why decisions were made for me, why my judgment about my own money required her oversight even as an adult woman with a stable career. Watching that number change by over 200 points in 4 business days did something strange to my sense of time. It meant the entire evidence base for who I had believed myself to be had never actually been evidence of me at all. It was evidence of her filed under my name for 19 years, and it took 4 business days of federal law to correct what 19 years of family narrative had built. I have thought about so strange it is that the law moved faster than my own family ever did. Jackwogul Day. 8. The kitchen table Dakwokepel del Day. I did not confront my mother in anger. I want to be precise about this, because I think the audience expects a scene, and what actually happened was quieter and, I think, more effective than any scene could have been. I invited her to my kitchen table on a Sunday in June. I told her I wanted to talk about something serious. She came, as she always does, with a coffee cake she had not made herself, purchased that morning, presented as homemade, which I had noticed my entire life and never once mentioned. I laid the folder on the table between us. I did not slide it toward her dramatically. I simply opened it, the way you would open a folder at a business meeting, and I began at the beginning. This is a department store account opened in my name in 2001, I said. I was 11. Here is the original application. This is the signature on it. My mother's face did something I had genuinely never seen it do in 36 years. It went completely still, the specific stillness of someone doing rapid arithmetic behind their eyes about exactly how much I knew. She said eventually, "Renata, I do not know what you are trying to imply." I did not raise my voice. I have found, in the month since, that I am simply not capable of raising my voice at her, and I used to think that was weakness. And I have come to understand it is something closer to discipline. I said, "I am not implying anything, Mom. I am showing you documents. Here is the auto loan for the Honda Accord that was registered to Kurt's address. Here is the letter from Fran at the fraud department confirming the account was, in her words, managed responsibly for 11 years before it went into decline once I moved out at 20. My mother reached for the coffee cake, which I understood. Watching her do it was not hunger. It was a hand needing something to hold. She said, "You have no idea what things were like back then. Your father was out of work. I did what I had to do to keep this family together." I said, "I believe that things were hard. I do not doubt that for a second. But I want you to hear the next part very clearly, because it is the only part that actually matters to me today." I told her about the FTC report. I told her about Detective Yubina. I told her that I had already written her name, her full legal name, on a police report, in the space marked person who committed this fraud, 6 weeks Woosier. There was a long silence. My mother has never in my life sat through a silence longer than about 4 seconds without filling it, and this one stretched past 30. Then she said, "You went to the police? About your own mother?" And I said the sentence I had practiced in the car on the way over, the one true sentence I needed her to actually receive. "I did not go to the police about my mother," I said. "I went to the police about the person who spent 19 years telling an 11-year-old girl she was bad with money, while quietly spending money in that same girl's name. Those were the same person, Mom. But I was not filing a report against you as my mother. I was filing a report about what happened to me, because it happened. And the law has a name for it, and the law does not require me to feel a certain way about you before I am allowed to use it," she said. And I will never forget this, because it was the last thing she ever said to me on the subject. "I only borrowed your name. You had nothing anyway. What was I supposed to do? Take out a loan I could not pay back myself and ruin my own credit?" I sat with that sentence for a long moment, because I think it is the truest thing my mother has ever said to me, in the sense that it revealed, completely and without her meaning to, exactly how she had always understood the two of us. My credit was expendable because I had nothing. Hers was not expendable, because she had something to protect. I was, in her accounting, the cheaper account to damage. I said, "That is exactly the problem, Mom. You are right that I had nothing. I was 11. And you decided that having nothing meant I was available." She was quiet for a moment. Then she tried something I had genuinely not anticipated, which was tears. Not performative, at least not entirely. I think some part of what she felt in that moment was real grief at being seen clearly for the first time in her adult life. She said, "I am your mother. Do you understand what it is like to be desperate and to be the one everyone is counting on to fix it? You do not know what that pressure does to a person." I said, "I believe you that it was hard." I have never once said it was not hard. But Mom, I need you to hear this part because I am only going to say it one time. Being desperate did not require you to use my name. You could have told me the truth. You could have said, "Renata, we are struggling," and asked me, the way you asked Marisol at 18. She said no, and you accepted her no, and you never touched her name once. I never got a no to give you, because I never got asked. That is the whole difference between what happened to her and what happened to me. And it is not a small difference. It is the entire crime. She did not have an answer for that. I watched her search for one, and I watched her not find it, and I think that absence, more than anything I said, is the moment the conversation actually ended, even though we continued speaking for a few more minutes after it. She left about 20 minutes later. She took the folder's photocopies, which I had prepared for her specifically, a full duplicate set, because Ivan had suggested it, and he was right, because it meant she left with the facts in her own hands instead of a story she could revise on the drive home. G. Pegel Dag 9. What did not happen, and what did? I want to give you the honest ending, not the satisfying one, because I think the honest one is more useful to anyone watching this who is in the middle of something similar. I did not press criminal charges. Detective Ubina explained to me that I could, and that the statute of limitations on the newer accounts, the ones opened within the last several years, had not yet run out, and that a prosecutor might well take the case, given the documentation I had. I sat with that option for almost 2 months. I decided not to pursue it, and I want to explain why, because I think the reason matters more than the decision itself. My mother is 66 years old. She has a heart condition. I did not choose mercy because I believe what she did was small. I choose it because I decided, deliberately, that the rest of my life was going to be organized around my own healing rather than around her consequences, and pursuing a criminal case, for me, would have kept my whole nervous system locked to her for another 2 or 3 years through a court process. I wanted my name back. I did not need her in handcuffs to have it. What I did do was permanent. The blocks on all 11 trade lines became permanent once the 30-day period for her to formally dispute the block passed, which she never did, because disputing it would have required her to legally assert the debts were hers, which they were, and which she was never going to admit in writing to a federal agency. My score, 1 year later, sits at 781. I bought a small house in October. It has a kitchen table exactly like the one this conversation happened at, because I picked one on purpose that looked nothing like my mother's, round instead of rectangular, pale oak instead of the dark cherry I grew up eating dinner on every night. I sit at it most mornings with coffee, and I still, occasionally, feel a small flicker of the old fear, the one that used to whisper that I was bad with money, and then I remember the number, 781, sitting there in black and white, disagreeing with her. My mother and I speak twice a year, at most. Marisol and I are closer than we have ever been. She has since had her own conversation with our mother, a much shorter one, about the card she was asked to open at 18 and refused, and about what it meant that she was asked at all. My father found out about all of this in July, from Marisol, not from me. I had been putting off telling him, partly because I did not know how, and partly because I think some part of me was protecting him, the same way I had spent my whole life protecting my mother's version of events. He called me on a Sunday evening. He did not say much at first. Then he said, "Renata, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Did I know about this?" I told him the truth, which is that I do not know what he knew and what he did not, and that I have decided not to spend my remaining energy trying to reconstruct exactly how much of it he saw and chose not to see. He was working 2 jobs through most of those years, and I believe he was tired in a way that made it easy not to look closely at where a washing machine or a set of Christmas presents had actually come from. He asked if he could see the file. I sent him copies. He called back 3 days later, and he had clearly been crying, and he said, I keep thinking about the tires. In 2004. I remember those tires. I thought we finally had a good year. I did not have anything comforting to offer him, and I did not try to. I simply said, I know, Dad. Me too, in a different way. We are closer now than we were before any of this happened, which is not a thing I expected. I think grief, when it is finally allowed to be shared honestly between two people instead of managed and hidden, does something that silence never could. I want to close with the thing I would tell any of you sitting with a number you do not understand. If your credit does not add up, if there are accounts you do not recognize, if you have spent years believing you were simply bad with money without ever once actually checking the file, pull your full report. All 3 bureaus. It is free, and it takes 20 minutes. And if what you find does not match what you did with your own 2 hands, know that the law has already agreed with you, whether or not you have ever been told it exists. IdentityTheft.gov and a police report are the whole mechanism, and 4 business days is the whole promise, and you do not need a lawyer or an army to use either one. Peruse the report before you assume the number. That is the whole lesson, and it cost me 19 years to learn, only because nobody in my life had a reason to teach it to me sooner. 20 minutes at a government website and 1 visit to a police station is a very small price for a truth that large. Nobody ever told me the paperwork existed. I am telling you now that is my story. 11 tradelines, 19 years, a washing machine, 2 Christmases, a set of tires, and 1 form with a name written on it in a hand that finally stopped shaking a long time before I ever picked up the pen. If you have ever been called the failure by the person actually spending the money, hear me. The debt was never yours. It never needed your permission to stop being called that, and it never will. If your own numbers have never quite made sense, go pull the file. All 3 bureaus. 20 minutes. You are allowed to know your own name. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you at the table.